Welcome, everybody, to Thoughtful Discourse in Social Studies. Think critically, discuss civilly. I'm Becky, and Kelsey is here. We'll introduce ourselves a little bit more later.
All right. Well, a little bit about who Becky and I are here from, or who we're representing, is we both work at TCI, Teachers Curriculum Institute, and we are going to tell you more about TCI later. But ultimately, we are a company of. She's ready to go. She's like, Kelsey,
Sorry.
that's it. No, that's good. We are a company of teachers. And you're going to see and hear a little bit more about some of our resources that we have to offer. But Becky and I both use TCI in the classroom. And that does lead us into our next slide, which is a little bit more about Becky and myself. I'm not going to talk about this too long, but I am a former high school social studies teacher. My name is Kelsey, and I taught for a while in the classroom. I've been with TCI now for about 8 years, and are just excited to talk to you about some of the resources and some of our experiences in the classroom today. And so I'm looking forward to that. And then I'm joined by my amazing colleague, Becky, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Yeah, I'm Becky, and I love to share with teachers about different strategies and what can help you go to the next level of your teaching in your classroom. So I come from a long line of educators, if you read my bio, and so I'm real excited to still be in education and helping teachers across the nation with my work at TCI.
Excellent. Okay, well, we told you earlier we were going to ask this, and I see a lot of you have already thrown this in the chat, which I love. But we would love to hear from the rest of you if you haven't done this. Where are you from joining us today? And then what do you teach? Just drop it in the chat. It's just a great opportunity to be able to know who's joining us today and just be able to interact. You'll see today, Becky and I will ask quite a few questions. So this is good practice of using the chat. We definitely don't want to just sit here and just talk at you, but we want to interact with you and get your responses and your feedback. So I love it. All right, what do we got in here? Becky, what are some of the things? We've got Arizona, fourth, we've got elementary, we've got middle, we've got high coming through.
I saw a music teacher too, saxophone,
Great.
I think I saw earlier. That was cool.
Love it. Awesome. All right, great.
So we've got all kinds of people from all across the nation and other parts of the world. That's really cool, because we do face some of the same challenges wherever we are, right?
Absolutely. So hello to everybody that's here. We're so glad that you're joining us today, and we are going to just jump right in. All right. So today we're going to be talking about thoughtful discourse in social studies and thinking critically, discussing civilly. And ultimately, as both former classroom teachers, this is something that Becky and I have spent a lot of time thinking about and talking about. And so we are really excited to be able to jump in today to this topic and really, really dive in. But what will we be looking at? Kind of what does that mean? What's our agenda? Just a little background on what is the state of civil discourse today for us in the classroom, the why, the what, and how you can get your students engaged in that productive discourse. And we're going to really dive into a specific strategy today. So we want you to be able to walk away with some very practical steps, some handouts for you to be able to take. And that's really where those tools to support you are going to come in to play. So lots of opportunity for you to communicate with us in the chat. And well, here's our next one right here. Okay. So I think one of those questions, or one of the things to be really thinking about, is when we're leading those engaging discussions in our social studies classrooms, or really any of our classrooms, how comfortable are you right now, if you were to rate yourself today, with doing this in your own classroom? 0 being not at all comfortable to 5, you love it, sign me up. I'll lead all discussions in every classroom, including you can volunteer to come into it, like Becky or I's. But I'd love to know kind of where's our comfortability here, so we can kind of get a baseline for where we jump in. I saw a lot of 5s initially. I'm just going to throw that out there, Becky.
Yeah, we've got some.
What are some of the things
2s and 3s that are looking to refine? Oh, we've got a 6.
I was just going to say, I love that.
Rebecca.
All right, very
confident. Yeah.
That's great.
Oh, Rebecca said LOL.
I love it, Rebecca. Great. You love discussions. I mean,
awesome. We'll probably have some good things to throw into the chat as we go through today. Awesome. Thank you, guys.
All right, so just a little bit of background and kind of laying the groundwork for us here. Why talk about this? What are some of the things that we're seeing? Some really, I think, telling stats that we have here. So, 77% of educators believe that schools should be teaching students how to have respectful conversations. All right, I think all of us could agree here. Yes, we should be doing that, and we should be doing that in the classroom. So, what does that look like? And then this one for me, again, as a former social studies teacher, 80% of civics teachers self-censor according to a 2025 survey. Okay, it's quite a bit, right? Where just um, that potential fear of the repercussions of how do I say this thing or not wanting to offend someone. And then 57% of global employers say the most desirable skill in the workplace is communication. And I think that one we're going to see really play out here, but just keeping those things in mind right here, right? Why are we talking about this? What is important about having those civil discussions? What does that look like? Hopefully some of these things will kind of lay the groundwork for you to realize and to know, which I think we could all agree that it's necessary and beneficial that we not only are able to do this as educators, but teach our students how to be able to do that and give them the skills to be able to do that. Right? I love this research from commonsense.org, learning from conflict, discussing controversial issues in the classroom. It shows students experience cognitive and developmental benefits when there's a couple things when we see this happen. You have that perspective taking approaches, right? Where everyone has an opportunity to explain various viewpoints, where they have the opportunity to listen and confront views. So the teacher can ensure that different points of views are listened to and then also talked about, right? Confronted, having that conversation. And then to be able to examine controversy, wow, if I can speak today, cooperatively, right? Where we can look at something and talk about, okay, how can we come together? How can we have this conversation in a productive way? And those things, that perspective taking approach, listening and confronting views and examining those controversial topics cooperatively is something that we're really going to dive into together today.
Yeah, and Craig has a question in the chat asking about that last slide where it said about self-censor, right? 80% of civics teachers self-censor. And in that survey, it was that the teacher said, I'm not gonna talk about this. I'm just not gonna bring it up, right? So that kind of self-censoring because they didn't want to manage that conversation in the classroom. So that's
that fear of that pushback or that controversy, right? From doing that. That's a great question, Craig. Thanks for sharing. Asking.
So, Kelsey shared with us, why it's necessary and beneficial, and it really is for our students. It's going to benefit them in the classroom, and it's going to benefit them later too. Alexis Wiggins, in her book, The Best Class You Never Taught, she talks about this spider web discussion, which is some of that same kind of thing we're going to share today with response group, right? And she said in there that one of the reasons she likes to do discussions, like many of you said in the chat you like to do, is because today's jobs demand more of that kind of skill, right? The ability to read the room, to relinquish power, right, when needed to, and that today's jobs are more team oriented, right? There's less of a hierarchical, that's hard to say for me, strategy and culture in the jobs today. And one of the quotes that then I read in the book is this Aristotle quote, right? A group of people, each possessing a part of knowledge, can collectively make better judgments than any one person alone. So Aristotle saying we need each other, right? We need response groups. We need to talk about things in these different groups. And so that's what we want to share with you guys today. How can you do response groups?
Well, yeah, I mean, so for both Becky and I, right, there's ultimately, no matter what you teach, we want to share with you a strategy that you could apply across really any of the classes that you teach. And how can you walk away with, okay, some actionable steps to be able to engage your students, right? And so one of those, or the one that we're really going to dive into today, is called a response group. And before we talk about the strategy, we're just going to do something we call visual discovery, which is I want you to look at this image that you see right in front of you of a classroom. And what are some of the things that you notice looking at this image? And I'd love if you just throw them in the chat, maybe something that you notice about the students or the teacher or the classroom setup. So just,
The
throw them in
name
there.
tags of some kind. So the
Okay.
table tents on the
Right.
desk.
Great. Right. John says engagement. Students are looking happy and engaged. Okay, absolutely. That's good that they're not frowning. So that is good. Becky, what are some of the other things that we see in
I
here?
see small groups. They're looking at their group mates and not the teacher, right? Learning how to discuss. So lots of things. Yeah, lots of things. So let's see what are some of the different parts of a response group that you guys already picked.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, actually, Becky, could you go back one for a second? Because
Yeah.
I'm just, as I look through at just the different things that people are throwing in there, right? The teacher is the moderator. They're discussing cooperative groups, perhaps groups of 3, right? I love the last one. They have great posture. Yes, I'm going to be honest. That's not, I think, super typical, at least of most of my students. So there you go. But working together, actively engaging in discussion, right? All of those things, the seating arrangement being really particular. You called out really a lot of the pieces of this strategy, which is why we showed you that picture. I'm so sorry, Becky, you can go ahead to the next one. I just want to make sure we hit on all those ones that people shared. But absolutely. So there's a couple hallmarks of a response group strategy, right? That we're going to use to facilitate this discourse in the classroom and then debate with small groups. So number 1 is creating those small groups. So putting them in the small groups so that they can discuss the issue ahead of time. So that's number 1. 2, they're going to analyze some sources. So we're going to pick difficult sources, problems, or perspectives, but they're going to have something that they can work from, right? A text that they're going to be able to access and to reference. We're going to give them time to prepare for debate. So prepare questions they're going to be able to go through. They are going to prepare for that. Then we're going to allow them to evaluate and construct their arguments, look at the evidence, draw conclusions, get those arguments ready, and then we're going to facilitate that discussion and having that be present in your classroom, and you'll set them up for success if we could do that 1, 2, 3, and 4 before we jump into 5. But what does that actually look like? And Becky is actually going to walk us through a lesson really step by step. Oh, before we do that though, we want to ask this, and Becky, I'll let you do this. Sorry, I was ready to just dive into our lesson.
What it looks like. I want to just take some time for you to soak in what Kelsey has shared, right? Because that's something that we like to do as teachers, give people that are listening time to think. So what are some topics that you might want to use in a response group, right? Do you have some ideas at this point?
What are some of the topics that you're thinking about that we could
the diversity address? The nameplates, I believe, in that image that we were looking at was Federalist, Anti-Federalist, and Undecided, right? And so sometimes some different things like that. Yep. Food choices, all kinds of things, right? There's a wide variety of things you can use with response groups, right? And so we're going to look at one topic that's near and dear to my heart. I spent a lot of time in the middle school classroom, and so I want to share with you one of the strategies that I would use when I was teaching, right after we had looked at the reformers, right, in the 1800s. I would use this response group with my students, right? And so I'm just going to kind of walk you guys through what I would do as I started that in my classroom. This usually happened, this topic happened in the second semester for me. So we've done a response group or 2, but at this point, and so they know when I use those terms. But I'm going to just kind of walk you through like you haven't really done it, right? And so the first thing I would do is start with a preview, right? It's going to kind of be a segue into our discussion. And so they're sitting at their desk, and I give them directions. Silently consider the following statement and determine if you agree or disagree. And you need to be able to state why you believe the way you do, right? So they have to not only say, yes, I agree, but why, or I disagree. And so this is the statement. Women are equal to men. And I put the little pencil on there to remind myself to tell my students, we're going to write this down in our spirals, right? And I usually need to remind them the directions at this time. And sometimes they say, Miss Smith, what do you mean women are equal to men? How? I'm like, that's the statement. Women are equal to men. Do you agree or disagree? And tell me why. And I give them a couple of minutes to think about that, to write it down. And after I've given them, some time, then I'm going to move them into their response group, right? I'm going to have them move into groups of 3. And this is something we do from the beginning of the year, just one of the things that I like to have my students do. So when I put up a map, they know how to do that. But you would move your students into groups of 3, however best you would like to. So we're creating that small group. Remember, Kelsey had walked us through the different components. And I like this grouping of 3 because it's hard to hide in a group of 3 when you're discussing, right? And one of the goals is to get everybody engaged in this discussion. And then they're going to need some information, right? We have studied at this point the different reforms, and so the women's movement was a part of that. But we're just going to take a little time to remind everybody, and because everybody on the line is not an early U.S. history expert, right? Just give you a little background too, right? And so I would just give them some time. So one of the things is to analyze sources. And so the Declaration of Sentiments is going to be a part of this lesson. And I would remind them that it's modeled after the Declaration of Independence. And its first line was, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal. And that up until that time, women in America were not allowed, for the most part, there were a few exceptions here and there, but to vote, to own property, to keep the money they made. We go over these things that we talked about during that reform movement also. And then remind them about, remember the Declaration of Sentiments was presented at Seneca Falls Convention, held in Seneca Falls, New York, July of 1848. I always remember the day it started because it happens to be my birthday. I wasn't born in 1848, but I was born on July 19th. So
I appreciate you clarifying that for
yes.
us, Becky, in case some of us were confused in here. So
some days it feels like maybe 1848, but not today, not today. All right. And that at that convention, there were 2 main women, right? Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott. And then, of course, one of those other reformers that we've finished studying just recently is Frederick Douglass, right? He was also there. So there were a few men at this women's rights convention. So the question remains, right? So I've reminded them, I've made sure that the students kind of have a good footing going into this. If they were absent a few days maybe during the unit, and we're getting to this activity that's going to kind of wrap up our time together with that. And I'm going to give them that question that we're going to be discussing, that complex issue, right? How far have we come since Seneca Falls, right? So that's the question that we're going to look at. They're in groups. They have started their opinion. They wrote it. They got into their groups and shared in their groups. And now we're going to get into the complex issue to debate. So I would provide my students with some materials, right? I want to make sure there's structure to this classroom discussion. And so I am going to give them some guides. I'm a visual person. I like slides. I like handouts, right? And so I would provide them with some handouts. And this would be what is going to guide our discussion. We're going to look closer at this, so I'll talk about that in just a minute. And then I'm also going to give them this information about women today, right? Because if I've asked a question, how far have we come since Seneca Falls, then I need to give them, I don't want to just have them go on what they think. I want them to discuss on what they know, right? So here are some facts that are compiled. Kelsey's throwing some things in the chat for you.
I just put them in there so in case you're like, I can't read that on that screen.
pretty
You've got them in
tiny.
there.
Yes.
You've got them in there. I've got it open on my other screen over here too. So I was like, make sure I've got the link in there, but you've got them in there so you can be able to see this. And I'll follow along with us as we do this lesson.
And so the students have this in their groups. And then I'm going to continue with providing those clear expectations, because that's really important as we get into the response group, right? They need to know what I expect of them and what they're supposed to do. And so we look at excerpt A, especially if this is the first time I've done a response group with my class, right? We're going to look at this. And the first thing I'm going to ask them to do is I'm going to ask them to rewrite the excerpt into simpler language, so that, a classmate would understand. I used to think I could skip a step like this, right? That it would save me time, but it didn't really save me time, because I missed out on being able to correct any misconceptions that were coming up and really have the students understand what they are discussing. So learn from my mistakes, right? And take time to have them rewrite. And you might be looking at some of the vocabulary and you're like, oh, my students don't know all that. I did add in the excerpt, some of the meaning of some of those words, right? But redressed and grievance are words we discussed when we were studying the Declaration of Independence earlier in the year, right? So I would pull my students back to use that spiral we're keeping to look up those words. Depending on the classroom, I may define them again for them or with them, right? You know your students. You're the expert of your students. You know those kind of nuances. So you want to make sure they understand those words so they can rewrite it, right? And so I'd tell them they're going to do that.
Becky, I'm going to just totally interrupt you for just a second too, but I love this because it just is an opportunity to stop and have them think about their own verbiage, right? I mean, I think about how much classroom just that language changes, the words that they use, right? It's been a while since I've been in the classroom. I have young children who are constantly using verbiage language. And I'm like, what the heck are you saying? Right. And so giving them though that opportunity to tie in something that you're giving them to something that they know. Right. And so I think that is just a really valuable piece of just that step one of this process.
Yes. And it's so good because they're going to face things their entire life that are written in a way they don't quite get. Yes. Right.
Yep.
So giving them the opportunity to practice, how do I take this and make sense of it? Right.
Totally.
And so life skills all throughout this. And so that's the first thing they're going to do. They're going to rewrite that excerpt, and then they're going to discuss in their little small group of 3, to what extent has this grievance, right, this unfair treatment been redressed? How has it been set right? And they're going to mark the spectrum on their handout. And then as a group, they need to come up with evidence that's going to support why they placed themselves where they did. And I like to tell my students, nobody can be right here on this line, right? You have to be a little towards not redressed or a little towards totally redressed, but you can be right up against somewhat redressed if you want. But we have to be somewhere on either side of that line. And give them time, 4 to 6 minutes really is usually enough time for them to take this little excerpt and begin to discuss that and determine what evidence they're going to support their placement. And then they need to prepare their spokesperson, right? You can determine how to pick the spokesperson. I often like to say, I might say, hey, the person with the longest hair, raise your right hand and repeat after me. And once all the hands are up, I say, repeat this, say, you're going to be a great spokesperson, and tap the person to your right, right? And
keep them guessing,
right? And sometimes maybe I don't do it that way, right? So it's just a way that they don't really know, but they know, especially if this isn't the first time we've done a response group, every single person in that group is going to get a chance, because if you're able to see the excerpts, we have 3 excerpts that we're going to discuss, right? So trying to set it up to where you have several things to where everybody gets a chance to present, because that's one of those skills that you are working on, right? So then we've provided the clear expectations. We give them the time to discuss this, pull evidence, get their spokesperson ready. And especially that first excerpt, I might say, okay, take a few more seconds just to prepare your person because they're going first, right? They're probably a little more nervous. And then I'm going to have them share. We're going to facilitate that discussion, right? One of the response group components. And the first thing I'm going to ask them to do, I've done this several ways, right? I have an actual paper, not redressed, somewhat redressed, totally redressed, have the spectrum up. I might have some buttons on a slide, right? And have them drag on the slide on my smartboard, where they are, that type of thing. But somehow to visually represent where their group is on the spectrum, and then to say how they rewrote the excerpt, right? And then I'm going to give them some structure, right, of what they are going to do, what the skills that we want in a good discussion are. And I have a little rubric. I'll share that with you later that I often would give my students a piece of, and I would have it on a clipboard. And then the big thing I want to remind them this time is how they're going to talk to each other, right? They're going to say the name of the previous spokesperson and then say our group agrees or our group disagrees with your group's placement. So I'll give a little, talking track there for them. And the presenters only need about 30 seconds to a minute to share, right? And my goal as we do this is for me to be less and less involved in the conversation and for those groups to start calling on each other. And so this might be a time when I tell them to do that, right? You know your students, you know the skills you want to work on. They do the discussion, right? And then we go through and we do it with excerpt B also, right? So now they're going to go back. They're going to evaluate, they're going to construct, and they're going to facilitate a discussion again on excerpt B. So now we're kind of trying to raise the rigor a little bit with the questions, or go up Bloom's taxonomy, right? As we develop this. So we're really trying to challenge the students in a nice, sweet way, slowly, right? And they're going to do this. You might, as you begin to discuss this, to kind of mix it up, you might say, are there, for the next person that's going to present, anybody whose ideas are dramatically different than the group that just shared, or ask a presenter who hasn't spoken yet to consider everything that has been shared and what do they think, just kind of, sometimes you know when you need to kind of light the flame a little bit on the discussion. And I've even been known to walk around to groups and say, hey, why don't you argue this side of it, right? Just because I hear everybody else is taking another side, and give them, I usually know the middle school students that would love to kind of stir the pot, right? So all kinds of ways that you can get a good discussion going. And then at excerpt C, we're going to do the same thing. So you'll notice structure. They become familiar with what I'm expecting. And so then that takes that away, and they can just discuss. They can just think. They can now really think critically and discuss civilly, right? And that's our goal in a response group.
Well, and I think, and can you just back up a little bit here too, Becky? I think one of the things that at least I saw in my classroom, and I don't know if this is something that maybe some of you can agree with, is that sometimes we have the one or the two speakers that is just all the time there. They have something to say. They always have an opinion. They want to shout it out. They're always raising their hand. Perhaps some of you have some of those students in your class. What I love, okay, so LaShawn, yes. All right, we have at least one person that can relate to me in that. One of the reasons that I loved using this strategy is that, and Becky talked about this, you have your groups of 3, but this gives an opportunity for every person in that group to be able to speak, especially if it's not something that they would have done before, right? So it just gives that comfortability through the structure of the setup of how we're doing this and what we're the structure of the response group, so that there is an opportunity for every kid to speak and for all of their voices to be heard. And I think that's one of the biggest benefits of this. So I just wanted to make sure we highlight that as we're looking at that structure of the
Yeah.
setup.
And there was a question over here that says, can the rubric be changed? Yes. And we're going to show you guys in a little bit some of the different things that we've used in our rubrics, right? Lots of things that you can't look at all of them every time. So it would be one of those things, kind of like Bloom's taxonomy. At the beginning of the year, you might just make sure you're using names, and different things like that. And by the end of the year, calling on the next person, different ways where I, the teacher, am out of that conversation and they really are doing it themselves. So all kinds of ways. So yes, that rubric can be changed to meet your needs and the needs of your students. So this really does help students learn how to discuss, right? Because it's a safer time to talk to people just right around you than to share. I'm one of those students. I'm not going to stand up and share in class, right? But you put me in a group of 3, then I'm going to talk, right? Then I'm going to talk. But I'm not one. I sat at the front so I didn't have to talk loud to the teacher, right? That's me. So this helps students like myself really get into this. Virtual school, yes, it is a little more challenging. You can even use for this, you can use breakout rooms and then bring them back together. It works nicely then to have something on the screen to where they could drag and drop where they belong. So there's all kinds of ways we're teaching, and this can work in so many cases.
Well, and I love Jeffrey even talking about that school, right? That rewrite idea, that first one, that step one, just again allows the student to access the content in an easier way for them, right? And something that's a little more relatable. So just even that first step to be able to do that. And then what about that? What if you have a real small class, Becky, and we have, groups of 3, maybe it's challenging to do that. How could we kind of take this and run with that if we can't quite make those groups of 3?
Yeah, I think you could do it with a group of 2 also, right? But even if you only had 3 groups of 3, right? That's 9 students. And that would still be, several groups to discuss. The goal is to make it to where they have time to talk their ideas out without, like Kelsey was saying, sometimes that one student that really wants to monopolize. And so that is one of the things that you want to do when you're trying to have response groups in your class.
Yeah. And Matthew asked, do you have them think through their answers first before discussing, or is it more of that like full discussion / partner work, kind of that simultaneous piece?
Yeah, Kelsey, I think I've done it both ways. It just depends on, once again, I know I keep saying this, but it's so true in so many instances in our classrooms, right? You know your objectives, you know your students. You might do it one way first period and a different way fourth period, right? So there's not a rigid structure, but the components that Kelsey shared earlier, those 5 things, that's just there, that flexible guide for you to build a good response group activity. And so let's look at some of the different components of response groups, right?
Yeah. Okay. So we want you. We talked a lot about this. We're going to throw some things in the chat here in a little bit for you to walk away with, but we're going to use I should probably throw this in the chat. We're going to use something that's outside of our webinar here called Mentimeter. I don't know, maybe if there's anyone in here that has used a Mentimeter before, but it's just a way to interact with you in a little bit of a different way. So I'm going to throw this in the chat. You can either scan the QR code. So if you're on your computer and you're joining, and you want to just scan it and do this on your phone, you could totally do that. Or if you want to do this on your computer, you could use that link that I just dropped into the chat. But we're going to give you a list of a bunch of different tips for using this response group. And I want you to rank them what you think for you in your classroom, thinking about your own students, your own kids, what do you think is the most important and what do you think is the least important? I want you to rank them that way. Can you go back for just 1 second, Becky, to that last one for a minute? We're going to share some reflections and I want you to talk about, and I want you to really be able to defend, okay, if you think this is most important, why is it? Okay, so I'm just preparing you ahead of time, right? Setting that groundwork for our conversation here. And then I promise I will share the correct answers. So this is not just like a, I'm not going to follow up with that. So anyway, go to that next one for me if you could, Becky. All right, here are the tips. All right, so what do we think is like the most important? If we're looking at these things here, what we talked about with this, forming those groups of 3, rotating the role of the presenter, right? So that every kid can have an opportunity to be the presenter. Have the student presenter stand when they're speaking. Have the groups come to a consensus before they present their ideas to the class. Have presenters preface their comments with a phrase like, we agree, disagree with your idea because. Instead of having the teacher facilitate, have the presenters call on the next speaker. Or is it the configuration of the desks so that all of the students can see each other and they can see whatever image or discussion topic that we've got up on the screen? What would you say is most important? Again, from most important to least important. Okay, so this is live. So as you're voting, and some of you could throw some stuff in the chat here too, that's great. This is cool because we can see there's like 13 of you in there right now, which is awesome. So as you're voting, it's just changing what we think is the most important. So far, I shouldn't even read it out because it's literally going to be changing live.
Changing, that's right.
I know, which is awesome, which is great. So I really appreciate those of you that are in that Mentimeter, which if you haven't used something like this, I'm sure we all use different tools, but this one we found is really fun to engage. And I think about Jeffrey and his virtual classroom too. This is something that we found is great if we're with a group and we're not all in the same room together to just kind of get that instant feedback. So all right. So right now, okay, see, look, I say the words right now and it's literally changing before my eyes. All right. But we do have quite a few of us that say that having that role of the student that's presenting being changed, like constantly changing, right? That's an important thing, really important. Or, I mean, gosh, we talked about this area, right? The having them start with, we agree, disagree with your idea.
That seems to be kind of going 1 and 2.
Those 2 are swapping. Yeah, for sure. For sure. I love, okay. So, and I see we've got a couple other people that are commenting in the chat here, kind of putting in their 2 cents. This is, I suppose, a little bit of a trick question because the reality is there is not a right answer, right? All of those things, and I know Becky's getting us back into our slides, all of those things are really important and are a hallmark for the response group, but there's not one necessarily that is more important than the other one. You take those tips, take those strategies, and you make them work for you, right? What is most important to you? If you don't have enough to do groups of 3, then that's not going to be that big of a deal for you, right? That's not going to be that important. And maybe it is the presentation skills that they have, but ultimately all of those are part of the response group that you can take and work and make it work for you in your classroom.
Indeed, they are. And so it's a great strategy to do with your classrooms. When might you use response groups? We kind of asked that earlier, right? But these are kind of some buckets of some ideas to kind of prime the pump for you as you begin to think about other ways to use response groups, like to discuss controversial issues, right? Like, should people be trusted to govern, right? That can be a great discussion, right? Analyze primary sources. They were looking at the Declaration of Sentiments in the Seneca Falls one, right? And so they might continue with that and draw conclusions. How far have we come since Seneca Falls? You could solve a historical problem, right? Be advisors to the president on what to do and all kinds of different situations, right? And then understand multiple perspectives, right? They could really look at a single historical event or issue, like maybe after they've studied the regions of the 13 colonies, they could look at perspectives of different colonies on different quotes, like all those living in the colony should have religious freedom, or, different things like that. Or maybe our little learners, right, could even look at how are we good helpers, right? And how do we take care of our things, like in the library? And they could have some choices, and then discuss what's the best way, and then stand up and share that. And so this isn't something that just middle school and high school students can do. This is something that your younger learners can also do as we meet them where they are as learners, right? So there's all kinds of ways to do it and so many benefits, right? You're going to see your student interaction increase not only in the response group, but also after the response group, right? Because now they know two other people a little bit better, right? And they've heard from different people. And as they begin to use names, maybe, right, they're starting to learn the names of the people in their class, all kinds of ways. The learning is multimodal, right? They're reading, they're writing, they're speaking, they're being, self-reflective and listening to others. So many different ways that they are using to learn. And then one of the bullets that I really like here is the discussion focuses on students' ideas and not the teachers. As I read articles about this topic, right, recently in the most recent Educational Leadership, right, there's an article that talks about class discussions and how you want to get it more of the students discussing, and you're that guide on the side. You're definitely there, you're guiding, you know when to pull the reins back, that kind of thing, but you want the students to be discussing because they're the ones. I used to say the one doing the most on-task talking is the one doing the most learning, right? And so that is something that I wanted my students to do. This really puts the social back in social studies if you're a social studies teacher like Kelsey and I were. But social and learning is really good, right? That they learn how to communicate with each other. So those are some of the benefits. What thoughts, what questions do you have? Right.
I was going to say, Becky, I actually pulled up, we've got a couple that were in the Q&A, and I think you addressed a couple of these already. Karen just specifically asked, what does this look like with some of our youngest learners, right? Those first graders, maybe some good discussion topics for them. And I know you shared a couple of them, but if there are any other thoughts that you have on that.
Well, you can do all kinds of things with the students, really. I like when, of course, remember, I'm a social studies person, right? So I'm thinking social studies. And I know we have lots of different groups online, but to declare independence or not, right? Giving them different perspectives, the loyalist, the patriot, if you're looking at American history, right? Should the American colonies declare independence? I like having the students have those multiple choice, really with our little learners, giving them some choices, right, to think through, and then ask them to provide evidence of why that would be an important decision, right? See, we have some more questions coming in.
I do. I'm going to just read them to you. I know Matthew's got a couple of specific questions about TCI. Matthew, we'll definitely share some of those with you here in just a few minutes to share about that. And just, Bradley talked about in the classroom as a teacher, right? It's maybe not so much the students not being respectful of each other, but as a teacher, kind of going back to that, and if I wrote my stat here down, right, that self-censoring for fear of like kind of that repercussion or maybe people being upset about topics being discussed. And I think, Becky, as you talk about that comes back to, again, allowing the students a place to share, right? As opposed to here is my perspective on something, but I'm going to give my students an opportunity.
And honestly, that type of environment doesn't start on the day you start a response group. It starts with building that community day one in your classroom. And you want to build a culture where your students can take a stand and agree or disagree and still respect each other's opinions. It's a very necessary skill. And so it takes time and sometimes a little bit of redirection, but that is why you have the structure to the conversation, and it really does help. They learn, they rise to the occasion.
Love that. Some other questions in here, just like, when there's an emotionally charged topic or like you start to see, okay, we're talking about this and kids are heated, right? Like, Becky, what did you do in your classroom when you're like, oh boy, okay, we're getting, what did that look like for you?
Right. We can always just, take a silent second or two, right, to just think about what we're here for, right? Remind them that we're here to discuss historical perspectives on things. And it's really important that you take care of all that before they go out into the hallway, right? So you want to, and the lesson I was sharing with you guys would usually take me, I had 45-minute classes, so usually, 2 periods. But each day, wherever I was, I wanted to make sure that we had kind of taken care of some of those tempers that might have risen, and make sure that we just all know that we're here to learn and we're a big community together.
Absolutely. Okay. And then sorry, I just lost my questions here. Jacqueline asked a couple of different questions, like, when are groups always able to come to a consensus, right? Have you ever had a group that couldn't agree on a common statement? And kind of what would that look like?
I think usually they can, because I'm not asking them what movie they want to go see this weekend, right? It's more of a historical. And so when many times there's a perspective that they're supposed to look at from, and so pulling them back to, okay, well, that's what you think, but what do you think your perspective, right? So maybe you have, Benjamin Franklin or somebody, what would he say, right? What would Abigail Adams say, right? The different people, if you're looking at, I'm thinking about a lesson from the colonies, right, that I might teach sometime. So, and then sometimes it's good for students to know we can have differences of opinion and still have a discussion, right? So those are all learning tools.
All right, Becky, you're good. Right. Matthew's got some questions, but we'll come back to those here in just a little bit.
Excellent. So I wanted to, somebody asked earlier, can you change the rubric up? Yes, you definitely can. I keep a scoring tally sheet, right? And because a lot of time goes, if I spend 2 days on this, I might want to give a grade. And oftentimes I would set a base grade of 75, and then you had to earn to get to 100, right? So you had to earn by doing the things that we were looking at. So it's real important for them to know what I'm grading, what I'm, tallying on there. And I would have positive points and negative points, right? And so that is something, here are some of the different positive and negative points, right? And we're gonna share this with you guys in a few minutes, so you'll have those positive and negative.
I dropped it in already, so
excellent.
I did. I'm on it right now. Yeah. Becky, it's in there. Yeah.
And so there are some negative points, right? You could lose points because I want to make sure nobody's monopolizing the discussion, right? That you're not off task, right? We want to be involved. So those are some ways to help you come up with a grade. So we do have, if linking isn't working for you, right, and you want to scan a QR code, this is the Desk Olympics that we talked about earlier. When I would say get into groups of 3s, my students would know how those desks were supposed to go because we practiced this. I used those crazy days at the beginning of school to practice Desk Olympics, and my classes would compete against each other. I would time them. We would see how fast we could do it, right? And it really built that community of learners, side-by-side pairs, and then I had tables also. So I had to do this a little bit different, but they still learned how to do it. So that's there for you if you would like that. And then who are we at TCI, right?
Yeah, that's good. And you know what? Matthew, thank you for being patient. Matthew asked a couple of different times, some of those resources that we dropped in the chat, if we go back to look at those handouts, did TCI create those? I shared at the beginning, both Becky and I work for Teachers Curriculum Institute, and the answer is yes, those handouts are there. And also, actually, the strategy is not something that Becky and I, just were like, oh, this seems like a great idea. We both used TCI in our classroom, and Teachers Curriculum Institute. When we look at our curriculum, you're going to see not just response group, but we've got several different strategies, 6 different strategies really that you can look at and see that are built in to all of our lessons. Response group being one of those. But that really gave us and saw, okay, this is something that we can do in our classrooms. This is something that we can use. So TCI, all of the lessons will have one of these strategies incorporated. So lots of different types of response groups, which is how Becky and I really first learned about this, but then also saw the beauty of that, the structure and the setup, that it could be applied elsewhere as well. And so actually that QR code right there is going to allow you to dive into not just the response group strategy, but also visual discovery, experiential exercise, skill builders, writing for understanding, problem solving, group work, lots of different strategies. And these are applicable at the elementary level, middle school, high school, across the board. But can you go back just for a second, Becky, because I sort of jumped in there, but just a little bit more about TCI, because if you like what you saw here today and you're like, hey, this is something that I really can relate to. I feel like this is a strategy that I could use in my classroom. Maybe it's something that you are doing, but you want a little bit more structure around that, or you liked those handouts that we threw in the chat. Like I said, Becky and I didn't create those ones. That's come straight from TCI. And so we would love for you to be able to check out our resources and materials to be able to see what that looks like. We've got print and online resources. We are a company that really, our desire is that we can give you the resources you need as a teacher, but have them set up in a way that you don't have to do a ton of time prepping for that, right? And so ongoing support along the way. Both Becky and I use TCI in our classrooms, which is why we work for them today, because we saw, gosh, these are the things that our students love. Those response groups, those strategies and actions. Those are the pieces that my students, when they would come back and be like, Mrs. Moore, are you still doing it? They would tell me an activity. It's because it was a TCI activity. And so really changed the way that I taught. And that's why we're here. Becky, I don't know if you want to add anything to this in here, because we'd love for all of you that are here to be able to check these out for yourself.
Yeah, I found TCI, my first year in the classroom was 1994. And I stumbled upon TCI, and it changed who I was as a teacher, right? It was exactly what I wanted to do. And here was these guides. But as Kelsey was saying, these strategies work in all subject areas, right? As I would share my enthusiasm for TCI, even before I went to work for them, I would share it with my math teacher on my team and my science teacher. And we were able to figure out how to incorporate these same strategies into their curriculum, right? So I know we had all kinds of teachers online today. And so we look forward to knowing that you guys are using this strategy. If you're a social studies teacher and want to see what Kelsey and I fell in love with, we would love to share that with you too. And so there's these strategies, and then there's this slide here where you could get a little more information or follow us on these different social medias, right?
Yeah, actually scan that middle QR code, especially if you want to see some different lessons, just a snapshot of what it looks like through the elementary lens, the middle school lens, the high school lens. So something for everybody here. And that purple QR code, if you're like, I don't know about TCI, but I think I want to learn more, that'll get you into our newsletter, and you'll get some more information about it. So you can just see just a little bit of these amazing resources that Becky and I have really are just so grateful for as teachers in our own classrooms. So we would love for you to be able to check that out and see a little bit more there. Are there any other questions, any other things that you would like to share or know about before we wrap it up today? Becky has a couple more slides to share, but is there any other questions on this particular topic? There have been so many good ones today, I will say. And I love questions along the way, not just at the end. So I'm so glad that so many of you participated.
We just thank you for coming, right? Many of you put in a long, hard day at work today and then still jumped on the computer to listen to us share about something that we really love. And so thank you for giving us that opportunity and for sharing your time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank
Have
you.
a great rest of your Wednesday.
Yes. Yes.